We often assume that we have to approach life like you're going into it saying like, I have to work hard and do good work. And then that leads to this kind of success. And then that success leads to happiness. And really, it's often, maybe more often than not, the other way around, that if you kind of are happy to begin with, then you get the success.
This is Intentionally Ever After. Join intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bauman for a series of personal conversations and coaching sessions with various people about how living with intention shows up for them.
My name is Joe Bauman, and I am a once and future creative type. Former goldsmith. I guess, well, maybe I'm always a goldsmith, just don't do it professionally anymore. Currently, I am a professor, teaching professor of Spanish and Spanish linguistics courses. Both of those things I think are tied to me just being generally a very curious person. I like to ask a lot of questions, and the answers to those questions is really satisfying to me. So that's what's, always kind of driven me personally and professionally. I like to learn stuff. I'm definitely a learner. Languages, juggling, art, how to make beef jerky.
Yeah.
And that's about it. That's as far as I've gotten.
That is about it. That wasn't a range of things. That was the complete list.
That's my list.
Yeah.
I took notes. I prepared before.
That's
coming.
good.
That's what I came up with.
Yeah. Dr. Bauman, are you a family man?
I am. Yeah. Actually, that's another thing I maybe a big thing that I left off my very short list. I am. I'm married and I have 2 young kids, and that's an opportunity for me to try to sneakily, not so sneakily, mold them in my own image and hopefully raise a future generation of question askers and thing creators.
I like it. Yeah, it is a great, and no, it's not very sneaky at all. I mean, it's a pretty blatant move on your part.
Pretty overt.
Right? Talk about strong arming your way into that one. Yeah.
I literally tell them that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's good. Well, you're upfront and honest about it, which actually leads me to this first question. To you, what does it mean to live intentionally?
Wow, to live intentionally. My being a question asker, I think living intentionally means asking yourself questions about why you're doing what you're doing, sort of challenging yourself. And I think this has also come out of some conversations that I've had with you in the past. Yeah, I think it's about not simply going about your routine mindlessly. So I think being intentional is also being mindful. Yeah, and like I said, sort of challenging yourself on what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Gotcha. So challenging yourself to a degree.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I said, in the form of asking questions about what your motivations are, what your goals and purposes are, what the benefits are of what you're doing, what the costs are, that sort of thing.
Is it restricted to just kind of to the large items in life, the big ticket items, like career or, I don't know, life partner or things like that?
No, I don't think it has to be. I think it could certainly be something that you ask yourself about the small things. I mean, it's probably not quite as necessary to ask yourself, why am I eating breakfast right now? I don't know. Mm-hmm. That, I mean, I think it's a fair question.
Sure.
But maybe the big picture stuff is perhaps more important, but no, I don't think you have to only challenge yourself on the big picture things, because those small, everyday, seemingly mundane choices accumulating and kind of being part of the big picture anyway.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So as a self-professed poser of questions, is that how you consider living intentionally for you specifically on an individual level? How does it look for you to live intentionally?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I wouldn't, just to be very clear, to be very upfront, I wouldn't say that I necessarily practice that all the time. But okay. Yeah, I mean, presumably, conceivably, that theoretically, that's what it looks like for me, to have an eye on the big picture and kind of ask myself if the choices I'm making are going to have some important value, or if they're getting me somewhere, or are they helping me achieve goals or not.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting distinction between the reflective process and the doing of the thing. Where do you consider living intentionally to exist? Where does that fall in that continuum?
I guess maybe it sounds to me, as I'm answering these questions, it sounds to me like maybe more of a reflective process for me, because realistically, it's probably easier to ask myself a question about what I'm doing, not while I'm in the act of doing it, but, maybe either before or after, when I've got a quiet moment, or just a chance to think. So, right. I like to do a lot of post-game analysis about a lot of things in my life. So maybe that's where it is.
Such as?
It's just, I don't know. I mean, anything. Conversations that I have with people, how did that visit go with my in-laws, and, sort of like break down and nitpick and analyze.
So how did that visit go with your in-laws?
It was fine.
It was fine. That's good. Well, you can leave it right there. We can intentionally leave it vague and short and not dig deeper, right? Because I guess you could take it to the nth degree and say that you might be intentionally unintentional in a way, right? Is that possible?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I think it's easy to ask a question, but also sort of have a rough idea of what the answer is ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And yeah, with something like that, I mean, it just, a visit with in-laws is a great example of one of those cases where it's like, yeah, maybe just for self-preservation or to avoid making things awkward, it's best to be pretty superficial with the analysis on that one.
Sure. Yeah, going into it intentionally ambiguous, perhaps.
Yeah.
But
I do spend quite a bit of time, and even with visits to the in-laws, and I mean, and this is with my wife, just to be clear. I mean, we'll break it down the whole ride home.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay. Thank you for clarifying, because I thought this was internal dialogue.
No, it's not always internal. Sometimes it is, sometimes not. Sometimes I talk to myself, so it's like internal and external at the same time.
Yeah. And sometimes she won't respond, so then you truly are talking to yourself. So do you go in, is it that you have a pre-game prep, or is that it's only after the fact and you kind of say, we should have prepped?
And some of both. I mean, I definitely do some prep. I do some planning. I don't always stick to the plan.
Sure.
To continue the game or sport metaphor. I mean, sometimes the game plan goes out the window, in the heat of the moment, when you realize you're, down by 10 with 30 seconds left. You
got to abandon the run game.
Yeah,
that's fair. We call that cognitive agility, the ability to pivot. Yeah. What would you consider as one change in habit that for you has had an exponential payoff?
One change in habit. I've become, let's see. I've become less, I guess I'd say less judgmental in recent years. So, I've changed a little bit of, the habits that I had when it came to thinking. I mean, I guess this isn't really thinking so much about myself as it is thinking about other people, what other people are doing. I've become, I guess you could say, less concerned with the choices that other people make. And I think where it's benefiting me is that I spend less time feeling like, I don't know, that maybe it was you who recently mentioned something about keeping up with the Joneses. And I think I spend less time worrying about what the Joneses are doing. And it's helped me to sort of like let go of some of that, that stress or that burden of like wondering, am I keeping up? Or, if you look at social media and you see these sort of carefully curated little windows into other people's lives, and it's easy to, think that, the world is leaving me behind and I'm just not doing all of these wonderful things that other people are doing. And, so less judgmental in the sense that I don't, if someone else makes a choice that I don't agree with, I guess I'm less likely to spend time feeling like, oh, I need to point out how they were wrong or something like that. But also less judgmental, like I guess you could say, of myself, less critical of myself in that respect. I certainly spend plenty of time being critical of myself. Don't get me wrong.
Sure. That's healthy. Yeah. Well, how would you consider the process? How have you come to be less judgmental of maybe what others are doing and using it as a benchmark through the idea of like habit forming? What is kind of the process? Because the idea, I feel like is fairly common to be like, I don't want to, judge myself on others. So how have you considered that transition for you?
Yeah. So what you mentioned, the process, and I think a lot of that process came out of going to grad school, because I was trained to think objectively, or think as objectively as possible, and to think critically, not critically in the like everyday sort of conversational sense, the judgmental sense, but to to be careful in my reasoning, and try to avoid assuming that, say, someone else's success is at my own expense. So just for example, and that's definitely something that I did spend some time doing not too long ago, fairly recently. I went through a phase where I was applying for jobs, and I was trying to advance my career and wasn't really getting anywhere. And I was seeing other people who had graduated from the same grad program that I was in, moving on and getting what seemed to be, on the surface anyway, seemed to be these really good jobs that were the sort of thing that I was looking for, or at least the sort of thing that I thought I should be looking for. And it was, it was very tempting to, well, I shouldn't say tempting. I did feel for a while like, man, they're getting stuff that I should have been getting, so it's like I said, their success was at my expense. That was how I felt for a little while. And then, sort of came around to feeling like, that doesn't have anything to do with me, really. Their success doesn't have anything to do with me.
Yeah, it's that little bit there that came around. How do you feel like you came around? Was it just what was that?
I guess after a while, if nothing else, I realized that it wasn't getting me anywhere to think that way. I guess maybe for some people that can, what am I trying to say? That can motivate some people, but maybe I realized it wasn't working for me. That feeling of like, I'm being left behind, or people are getting these things that I should be getting. That wasn't making me strive harder or improve really my approach or anything, so I think I sort of left it behind because it didn't really have any benefits.
Right. That's great. That's great awareness. you had tried it on for size, that approach for so long. You're like, this doesn't feel good and it's not helping. So
yeah, that was the thing. It was, like you said, it was, I think I also realized that it was only hurting me. Not only was it wasn't effective, it wasn't productive, but it wasn't, it was uncomfortable.
Right. So it sounds like a big part of it was mindset shift, more so than maybe a physical practice of like meditation or a mantra or tying a string around your finger or something like that. What do you do to remind yourself of that?
It's funny. I think that's one of the things that I'm not very good at, actually, reminding myself of what is healthy or what is beneficial or what are the good things that I have. That's one of the things where when I start to, teeter on the edge of like spiraling into despair, that's where my wife comes in, and she's really good about reminding me like, hey, look at all this great stuff. And it's still an ongoing process for sure. It's just that like recognition of, I really do like what I do for a living. And, I do have a good place here. And that thing that I thought that I was, like I said, I sort of I felt like I should be striving for this thing, and then realized I don't know if I actually really want to do that. And and now it's helped me to feel a lot more comfortable with what I do. And the funny thing is that I sort of got comfortable or gained some acceptance with where I was, and then things improved. So
Interesting.
it was almost like and it's really funny. It's perfect timing, actually, because just yesterday I was listening to a podcast, and the guest on the podcast was mentioning that we often assume that we have to approach life like you're going into it saying, like, I have to work hard and do good work, and then that leads to this kind of success, and then that success leads to happiness. And really, it's often, maybe more often than not, the other way around, that if you kind of like are happy to begin with, then you get the success. And that's kind of how it happened with me.
Yeah, that's cool. The other cool part is someone's going to listen to this podcast, and because you listen to that podcast, they're going to get the benefit. So,
yeah, well, that's one you might actually listen to, or you might be familiar with it. What was it called? No, I can't even remember his name, but he wrote a book. It was like 1,000 Awesome Things or something like that. He had a blog a few years ago, and he's written several books, I think, about happiness and just, generally awesomeness.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of happiness and awesomeness and the combination.
I can't remember his name. A quick Google would,
sure.
A Google search would
I'll get my producer on it. Do some research. Well, that's great. Well, it sounds like you have a live-in resource to help remind you every now and then, to help kind of calibrate that perspective, right? And it's always nice when the universe kind of presents some validation as well to your perspective choices, your shifts. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. This is how I want to be feeling. And look, it does pay off. It will pay off. So it's always nice when that happens. What do you feel like you've had to say no to, or what have you chosen to say no to that has made a significant impact in your life?
Wow. Actually, that's one of the things that I'm not very good at, saying no. So, I mean, I can think of a few examples, specific, relatively small examples professionally, where someone has asked me to do them a favor, sort of go above and beyond my responsibilities. And my initial reaction is always to say, sure, yeah, I can do that. And I think there's a certain amount of like validation, if you want to call it that like, it makes me feel good to think that other people view me as the kind of person they can go to and, hey, we desperately need somebody to take on this extra thing. Like, would you be able to do it? And like I said, my initial reaction is always to say yes. And there have been a few occasions recently where I just had no choice but to say no. And it made me feel really good to say no, like just to then, go to sleep that night and think, man, I'm glad I don't have to worry about that extra thing, because it does add a ton of stress. But yeah, I mean, really, to be honest with you, that is one of the things that I struggle with the most, saying no. I often sort of get myself into positions where and again, this is one of those cases where I'll be getting really frustrated, and I'll tell my wife, I'm so stressed out. I'm totally overwhelmed with all of these things, and she's good about reminding me that, like, okay, well, some of that stuff is stuff that you volunteered for.
How helpful is that in the moment?
She doesn't say, she does not say it quite so bluntly. I mean, she's usually pretty good about saying it in a way that like reminds me that, like, oh yeah, I did volunteer for that. Or some of those things are things that you don't actually have to worry about right now. And some of those things are even, I mean, sometimes you can say no after the fact. I mean, sometimes it's possible to say yes and then go back and say, I told you I would do this, but I just can't. I don't do that very
absolutely
often.
True. Yeah,
I don't do that very often, but sometimes it's just necessary.
Right. Well, it's like if you're flying a plane, before you board, you're a pilot, and you tell everyone, "Yeah, I can land this," and then you get up there, and you're like, "I got to be honest, I really can't do this." Right? There's a certain point of no return.
Right.
You had said something interesting a bit ago, where you've said you're not very good at saying no. Maybe it's something you currently struggle with. But there have been a few recent examples where you have said no and it felt really good, but it was at a point where you said, I had no choice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I had no choice. I mean, I guess there's always a choice, but.
I guess that's what I'm curious about, right?
Yeah.
Is kind of unpacking that and maybe applying it to all the other things where you truly do have a choice at any given point.
Yeah.
So what were maybe any shareable examples of where you've said no, where you felt like you had no choice?
I guess sometimes it comes up when there are, what's a good example that won't require a lot of backstory or explanation? I get emails from former students of mine asking me to write recommendation letters for them, if they're applying to a law school or something like that, and I get, oh, okay. Yeah. So, and I also, my colleagues of mine, other professors will ask me to observe their classes and write, like a peer evaluation of their classes from time to time. And I like to be able to help people out by doing that. But yeah, there have been a couple of times recently where it was, trying to fit into my schedule a time to go to their class. And I realized I could kind of jump through some hoops here and like rearrange my week pretty substantially and make this work. Or I could just, and it was funny, like I'm thinking of one particular example where I kind of thought to myself in the moment, let me just try saying no and see if they'll accept that answer. Like, let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
And they were totally cool with it. I just said, I'm really busy. And I just have, it would be hard for me to make it work. And they were totally, okay, sure. I'll just ask somebody else. And I don't think and this is the thing where it often, like I mentioned earlier, it makes me feel good to think that other people view me as someone that they can rely on. And if they need something, they can go to me. I don't think that their opinion of me was harmed by me saying no that one time.
Seemingly, right? It does feel good that you are someone to go to, regardless of your response, right? Regardless of your capacity or willingness to help in that instance, right? You have been asked for a particular reason. So I think that's great. And I encourage you to keep practicing that skill, right? Use it on me. God knows there's plenty of opportunities, right? I like to force things. So I encourage you to try it out on me a lot.
I'll give it a shot. I think in my own experience, I think it doesn't work as well on you as it did.
Well, I've been practicing my skill as well as forcing things on people. So I've made that quite a habit as well. Since we brought me up, what area in your life feels just about perfect?
What feels just about perfect? I've been getting a lot of opportunities lately to learn new things, and that's maybe my single greatest passion in life. And some of them are big things, some of them are small things, and it can be as simple as watching a cooking show on Netflix and just kind of seeing somebody use a technique that I've never tried, and I'm going to give that a shot, or I'm going to try that recipe. Gotten into, and this is, one of those big, like, obviously pandemic related things that I got into, like some baking and gardening over the summer. I've gotten some new tools that have allowed me to do some kind of like woodworking home improvement projects, trying out some new techniques. So they've been kind of small things. They haven't been like major changes, but yeah, I think just being able to kind of keep feeding that fire, doing those things that sort of get my neurons tingling, listening to a great podcast where something really sparks my enthusiasm. That's an area I think that's been, just about perfect, getting to, on a regular basis, really pretty consistently learn things.
Would you consider that to fall in the category of personal growth?
Yeah, I would. I mean, because it's something that I view very much as a cumulative process. And I mentioned asking questions as being something that I like to do. And yeah, I mean, like learning just like goes hand in hand with asking and answering questions. And yeah, I mean, I think it makes me makes me a more effective human. The more that I know about the world around me.
It's a good soundbite right there. Makes me a more effective human. I like that. Who is someone you admire, and what do you admire about them?
Let's see. Well, okay, so one person, and this is, since I mentioned my wife already, I think she's definitely one of a couple of people that come to mind. Partly because of her ability to complement, complement, what, like, my way of thinking. Like I said, sometimes when I'm spiraling, when I'm getting really stressed, she's really good about kind of helping me see some stuff that I'm missing because I'm getting tunnel vision. So we sort of work off of each other really well. And so it's her ability to kind of think a little bit differently than I do. And also just her general creativity, which is another really big thing that I value in myself and in other people around me. She's amazingly creative. Yeah, that's sort of the first person that comes to mind. I also, the other sort of big person who's always been a huge influence in my life that I've always admired was my maternal grandfather, who was also sort of a creative type, but a bit of a, I don't know, I guess you could say sort of a Renaissance man, for lack of a better term. Really interested in a lot of different things, and I see a lot of myself in the way he was. He was a chemical engineer, and then after he retired, he taught himself how to paint and ended up being sort of an accomplished watercolor artist. And he became an expert on Pennsylvania wildflowers and like worked at a, museum/gardens place, collecting seeds for their wildflower gardens and so on. He was a woodworker, and so I mean, people like that, when I encounter people like that in my life, that's definitely something that I admire, again, because I sort of I see myself in that, being interested and stimulated by a lot of different things, and a passion for learning new skills. Oh, he sang in the barbershop quartet in his retirement community as well.
Did they wear the little hats and the
Actually,
striped,
I think they kind of did from time to time. I think I saw a couple of photos of him with his group.
I love that. At least yeah. I'm gonna even if you had said no, I was going to maintain the vision in my head that if that was the case.
Yeah. These white-haired 85-year-old men. Yeah.
Wondering if I can ask a related question. Who do you aspire to be like?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just because he's top of mind. I mean, yeah, my grandfather would probably be on the short list of people that I aspire to be like. And I think in recent years, it's been, I've realized that, and then maybe this is sort of speculative because I don't know for sure. I never heard it from him exactly, but I remember after he passed away and attending the memorial service for him, and the place was just packed with people, and a lot of them I had never met before. And I realized, again, I think I noticed that, it may have been the case that he wasn't just collecting skills as like a sort of a feather in your cap or, notch in your belt kind of thing. But partly because learning those new skills brought him into contact with lots of different people, and he made all of these friends. And these people were friends with him for lots of different reasons, because they were in the barbershop quartet, or because he was working in the gardens at his retirement community. And, there were other gardeners, and, so these people knew him for lots of different reasons. And it was sort of like collecting relationships and community experiences. And that's something that I've also started to really value in recent years, is that connection to a community that, again, you can sort of initially be motivated by trying to just learn something that benefits you individually, but then that can bring you into contact with other people who have, similar interests, and you can all sort of feed off of each other and benefit from that connection.
Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who didn't think that creating those powerful relationships was a measure of success, right? Even if it's not on everyone's radar, I think that's a near universal measure that you have lived a full life
Yeah.
Maybe even not even calling it successful, but a full life.
Yeah.
What do you imagine some people admire about you?
I think, people have mentioned, one of the things they admire about me is, and I think it's tied to the whole learning thing, but I think, people have said that they're sort of impressed or that they admire my ability to learn quickly, to sort of like pick up on things fairly quickly, or maybe faster than they themselves would expect to be able to do it. Kind of having that, you mentioned sort of like cognitive agility, but being able to use that agility to adapt to a new process, learn a new skill. Yeah, so like the sort of like quick learner kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I can attest to for sure. Because it's one thing for people to say that, but that you believe them as well, right?
It sort of occurred to me as soon as you said that's one of the things also that I think I've always struggled with, is getting feedback from other people and being, I guess there's no other word for it, but like being kind of cynical about it. It takes me a while to believe it when, and like I know that people have said, like, over and over and over again, they'll say things like that, like, oh, it's impressive that you can like learn this really quickly. And like, I guess it just takes me a long time to really like accept that they're being serious or that they really mean it.
Is it that you don't know that they believe it, if they truly believe it and are just saying it, or is it that you don't believe it about yourself?
I think just that I don't believe it about myself.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean about that.
Yeah.
That's fair. I don't. Yeah. I don't think it's that people are just like
blowing smoke.
Yeah.
Well, part of the spirit of these intentional conversations is to kind of invite you to share anything that comes up for you as we bring up the topic of intentionality and so I'm curious as to what thoughts you have around it or around anything, quite frankly.
Well, I think one really big thing that's been swirling around my head is my struggles with work-life balance, or the lack thereof. I always have had problems with that for quite a while, and it's gotten even worse since, being in a position now where I effectively work remotely / work from home all the time. Yeah, the boundaries between work and life are effectively non-existent at this point. So it's like, if I take this approach where I say, I work when I can work and I life when I can life, neither one of those really gets my full attention, or like neither one of them is as successful as it could be, or as effective as it could be. And that contributes to stress and anxiety. And then it sort of becomes this whole, spiral thing. So yeah, I think, when the question of like, what does it mean to live intentionally, or what's something that is right now requiring me to really give some really, serious, hard thought to it, it's just trying to, make a really nice, structured plan for myself, set up some boundaries, budget my time in a way that allows me to fully devote attention to life when I'm doing life, and fully devote attention to work when I'm doing work, and make it clear when I'm doing either of those.
Yeah, that is obviously there's a term for it, right? So you're not alone in this struggle, right? In this endeavor. Something I find curious, and I feel like you and I have chatted about this before, is, the idea of work-life balance, the term itself, right? We're distinguishing work from life, right? Like work is not life and life is not work, right?
Yeah.
And, certainly in the very recent years, I've adopted the mindset of work-life integration, because I don't feel like you can really successfully compartmentalize, for any long term without some cost. How does that shift, if we use that lens of work-life integration, how does that shift your current situation?
Yeah, I think that is helpful to remind myself that, one of the things that made me really happy and satisfied with my current job was just sort of encouraging myself to recognize that, yeah, I like what I do, sort of, get happy with what I was doing. And perhaps if I change my approach to that issue, and if I'm hearing you right, if you're sort of suggesting maybe thinking about it less as like an adversarial relationship between work and life, and try to look for opportunities where, sort of like, give up on the feeling like there's a battle between those two things and find ways that they can, intersect and overlap without causing tension, work together perhaps. Because I think, to be fair, again, that's one of the things that really stimulates me about what I do professionally, is that it is so closely tied with learning and critical thinking and asking questions and being curious. And as I already mentioned, that's one of the things that I like to encourage my kids to do. That's one of the things that I like to do with my family, so perhaps, getting myself to kind of change my mindset on that might be good, to try to find the ways in which work and life can work together, right? Sort of coexist in a healthy way.
What you're talking about doesn't require any additional space on your calendar, right? It doesn't require any additional physical commitment.
Mm.
So similar to how you kind of change your mindset around keeping up with the Joneses. It sounds like it's simply more of an opportunistic viewpoint, and in your words, less adversarial of a relationship between work and life, right? Because this the greatest passion, as you stated, I think, in life of being a poser, right? You get to do that as a profession. And so wouldn't it be great if it didn't feel like the enemy, so to speak, the enemy to your life?
Yeah.
And because I love to connect things, how might saying no to more things come into play here?
Yeah, I think, my first reaction is that, and as I've already noticed about saying no, is that when I say no, professionally anyway, because I think that's one of the other things that, just to sort of back up for a minute, I think one of the other things that's sort of unhealthy about my ability or inability to say no is that often when I'm saying yes to something, when I'm volunteering to something, it's a work thing, it's a professional thing. And then that's one of the areas where it does sort of pull me away from my home life. And so then if my kids want to play a game or something like that, and I say instead I have to, send this email or something like that, that's where it does start to feel like, okay, work and life are competing against each other. Saying no, perhaps a little bit more often professionally, if what that does is allow me to kind of pare back a little bit on the number of tasks I'm taking on at work, it might allow me to sort of enjoy them more, do a better job on them, feel more fulfilled. Then, that can kind of create this little feedback loop of being a little bit less stressed, being a little bit more enthusiastic and ready to play that game with my kids, having the time to do it. I don't know if that's an answer to your question.
Well, it certainly is an answer to my question. It certainly sounds like it's worth an experiment, at least, right? In the name of not having to make final life decisions here with any one approach. Well, I'll tell you what, I appreciate that you did not exercise your ability to say no when it came to having this conversation. I always enjoy speaking with you, but you and I have always had some really good, meaningful, intentional conversations. So I appreciate you being willing to continue that trend. But again, thank you for your time, Dr. Bauman. And if you would consider, if it works with your work-life integration vision, I'd love to have you back at some point so people can benefit from the additional things that you will no doubt have learned between now and then.
Sure, I'd be glad to. I have another 2.5 pages of notes that we didn't even get to.
I would love it. If there's a sound bite, or if there's not even that, throw some stuff at me if you've got some time.
Well, I mean, since we've been talking about saying no to things, it's actually one of the things that came up recently that I was almost kind of thought about saying no to, but I was sort of talked out of it, was an opportunity to go be sort of a co-faculty leader on a study abroad program in Spain for like a month in the summer.
Yeah.
And I mean, at the moment, things are kind of canceled / postponed, but
that was clear. One of the things. Why is that for cultural reference?
Just because there happens to be like a massive and devastating global pandemic going on right now.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that I had actually pretty recently brought up as perhaps an opportunity. I was talking to my wife about it as perhaps an opportunity to say, I don't know, maybe this is just causing me some stress right now, anxiety over whether it's going to happen or not, and all of the things that go along with making it happen, because the plan is for me to take my family with me, and having I guess at the time it'll be like a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old in a foreign country where they don't speak the language. There's going to be some extra stress there. But my wife, again, this is one of the times that she's really good about reminding me, is like, if somebody approaches you with an opportunity to get paid to spend a month in Spain with your family, and yes, there's some work there, yes, there's some stress there, but that's one of those things that you really want to be saying yes to, because it's an opportunity to go do something really special, really meaningful with the family. And again, this goes into that whole idea of like, where can we incorporate work and life as sort of the same thing at the same time? It doesn't have to be the whole Back to the Future where like the two Marty McFlys can't be in the same place, at the same time. That they, we can sort of coexist here. I mean, that is one of like a perfect example of like, yeah, you want to say yes to that.
Well, that's good. Yeah. What do you think you might use as a filter for determining what you say yes and no to? You kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm wondering if you have something that you can kind of embrace as a more simplistic reminder.
Well, off the top of my head, I think one of the things that, like, the first thing that comes to mind is, and since I mentioned, like, asking, sort of challenging myself, asking that question about like, what's the benefit and what's the cost? I mean, I guess that's just that traditional sort of pros and cons list kind of thing that you can do. But, thinking like, all right, what are the potential benefits of having an experience like spending a month in Spain with my young kids and with my wife, and what are the costs of doing that, and then also like what are the costs and what are the benefits of saying no to that. When I compare it with, like, for example, when one of my colleagues was asking if I could go and observe her class one afternoon, the benefit for me would have been arguably kind of minimal, not minimal, but like relatively small. The cost of saying no was like nothing. And even for her, me saying no, I don't think really cost all that much. Presumably she was able to find somebody else who could do the observation pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But with something like this, if I ask myself, like, sort of, think about it the same way in the context of, okay, here's this time that I said no, let's try to like project, and imagine what it would be like to say no versus saying yes to this opportunity. And now that I've had at least one experience where I said no, and I've had numerous experiences where I said yes, yeah, what do I think the chances are of this trip to Spain being a really good thing? Pretty good, pretty high probability.
Yeah, even higher probability if you go on the trip than if you don't.
If I go on the trip, and if I say no, what's the benefit? Well, the benefit is I don't have to, fill out the paperwork to get passports for the kids and be stressed about making those flights. And, like I said, there's going to be some stress and some anxiety, but
hang on. I got to call something up. There's going to be stress and anxiety anyway.
Well, actually, that was the second half of that sentence was that there's going to be stress and anxiety going to Spain, but if I don't go to Spain, I will surely find plenty of things to be stressed and anxious about. Like, it's
Yeah.
not like I won't have stress and anxiety if I don't do it.
Right. Yeah, I'll often frame it as hard is not to be avoided. It cannot be avoided, right?
Yeah. That was another one of my bullet points. Stress, anxiety is another big thing.
I mean, certainly we can work to reduce those things, right? But elimination of them is well. If you figure that out, you let me know, please, because I certainly will. I'll be happy to change my tune.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to at least be able to decrease my cortisol levels or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's a thing.
But yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it's not like it's ever gonna go away. I mean, and the stress is like, I mean, having some stress, some anxiety, I think can actually be sort of a good thing. I mean, it sort of, at least in my experience, it can kind of keep me moving a little bit.
Yeah, well, as you said, if there can be a certain amount to motivate you, but when it's no longer motivating you, then it's like, okay, I think we've gotten too much here. Let's find that sweet spot. And I think the more clear you are as to what works for you, know that to know thyself, if you will.
Yeah.
It's going to work to your benefit, and then that will help even more your ability to discern when to say no, right? Yeah. Is this quote unquote opportunity? Is this good idea going to be, tip me over the edge here into not being worth the squeeze here? I am throwing all kinds of metaphors at you in that one. Sorry. Just the fact is there's a lot to be thrown because it's, it's a pretty key point.
Yeah, no, I don't mind the metaphors at all. I'm a big metaphor.
Yeah, you are a big metaphor guy. Even if I do mix and match. What else you got for me? You got some notes?
Oh yeah, I thought you said we would get to them in part 2, but
yeah. Well, I mean, as long as you have a little bit of time, we can. I mean, this could be us doing part 2, and then I'll have you back for part 3.
Let's see. Like I said, stress and anxiety was kind of a big thing that seemed to come up a couple of times.
For sure.
Oh, some significant events that have shaped me. That was one of the things that you asked about. I mentioned going to grad school and how it trained me in the way that I think. A couple of other things I wrote down was that I think this one of the things that was really big in my life within the last few years was I actually ended up volunteering, or I guess you could say sort of being volunteered to be a leader with a local high school church youth group, which at the time was so far outside my comfort zone. Like, I mean, for one thing, religion has never really been like much of a big part of my life, or really, if at all, and so there was a certain amount of like, what is that kind of skepticism or even like fear of like, what are these people like? I had these sort of caricatures of what a church youth group looks like in my head, and I ended up doing it, and just the people I met, the experiences I had with the other adult leaders, with the high school students themselves, really opened up my eyes to so much. And we talked earlier about, forming connections with people. And that was one of the big things that really kind of opened my eyes to the importance and the value of community. So, I mean, that's just like the really short sort of, in a nutshell, what that was all about. And there's a lot more to it than that. I've actually, and again, I mean, this really kind of, brings us back to an example of one of those times where like life and work can kind of dovetail and mesh with each other. Because I've actually taken a couple of things from that experience into the classroom with me. I've actually like incorporated a couple of little practices from the
such as
youth group experience. So, for example, one of the weekly practices. So there's the youth group meets, or met, I guess. Now that's changed because of the pandemic, but met weekly on Wednesday nights. And part of the evening would be spent with small groups of students. So it would be like 2 or 3 adult leaders with, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the high school students. And start off the time that we had, we usually center around a particular like conversation topic for the evening, but we would start off by doing something that we called highs and lows, which was basically like, share something about the past week that really kind of had you feeling really happy or satisfied or fulfilled or alive or whatever. And then another thing that had you feeling, down or stressed or like you had failed or something like that. And I've used it in class. I particularly worked in a Spanish conversation course that I taught, because it was a great way to just get people using, because talking about stress and anxiety, for a college student using a language that's not their native language, and they've got all of this sort of affective baggage built up over like, what do I sound like? Other people are judging me when I'm making mistakes when I speak this language. To give them an opportunity to just come in and like just talk for 2 minutes about this thing where there's no right or wrong answer. This is just your experience. Tell us what's going on in your life for 60 seconds or 2 minutes. Kind of gets the ball rolling a little bit. So now they've opened their mouths, now they've been speaking, and now when we go into this conversation where we talk about the story that they read or what's going on in the news or something like that, they're a little bit less focused on again, that sort of like that anxiety or fear of judgment from other people. Mm-hmm. So it kind of opens the door a little bit, builds up some momentum in the classroom, and also builds some community, because now you have these students. By the end of the semester, what I noticed was the students kind of knew each other on a level that, at least in my experience, they typically wouldn't. Mm-hmm. So students would share things like I said, by the end of the semester, somebody would share something, and then, people would come, oh man, that's so you, Gabe. Like, they kind of, they'd have these reactions like, oh yeah, like, you kind of know these people, you've made connections.
That's great. That's great. Right. So you facilitated that for others, not just for yourself, but you've seen the benefit, and you're able to bring that to another community of people. Yeah. That's excellent. Any final thoughts for this portion of our, for the current iteration of our conversations together? Any final thoughts you'd like to leave me with, leave the listenership with?
Well, I think just in the course of the conversation, and as I was going through the questions that you shared with me and answering them, it's another great example of, and again, I think this goes to my answer, or my evolving answer to your question of like, what does it mean to live intentionally? It's another reminder that a lot of these things are things that I'm aware of, sometimes constantly aware of, and yet they're sort of on the back burner a lot of the time, or they're things that I'm like, oh yeah, like I know that about myself. I know I need to work on this or get better at this one thing. And when am I going to get to that? Just add it to the list, and it's number 47 on my checklist or something like that. And, like I said, it's another good reminder that like, some of this stuff should be moved farther up the list. And it doesn't mean having to, as you said, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need more hours in the day to get to it. It could simply be a matter of reframing or, changing the way that you think about it.
Wouldn't that be nice if it was that simple?
Yeah. Yeah, it would be. Maybe it's not always, but at least sometimes, right? And even if it's not everything on my checklist that I can do that with, even if it's just 3 or 4 things, right? If that takes me from 47 items on my list down to 43, that's still pretty good.
For sure. And to be clear, I actually do believe it can be that simple. Easy, no, not quite likely not initially, for sure. But I do believe it could be that simple. And I think frankly, if we play back our conversation today, I think you've really identified a lot of the key nuggets to make it that way for yourself as well. Things that obviously you've known, but when you boil down to it, you've come up with a lot of the key pieces to your filter of that intentional life. So So even if you don't listen to it, other people will know what matters most to you in life. Have your wife listen to it.
Oh, I'm sure she's going to. Oh, yeah. As soon as we're done, she's going to be asking me, when can I hear this?
Awesome. All right, sir. Well, again, I appreciate your time and your thoughts, and I look forward to our next interaction.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for inviting me. And I obviously feel like I got quite a bit out of this. Like I said, I mean, I've got my just pages of notes.
Excellent. Hang on to those. Those will be good. All right. Take care, my friend.
All right. You too.
This has been Intentionally Ever After, hosted by intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bauman. If you would like to have your own intentional conversation with Joe on or off the air, visit intentionallyeverafter.com. Thanks for listening.